Jeff Badger, the Grinding Doc. A short video on one type of barreling. There are several types of barreling, or typically divided into two. And this is one type of barreling that you get in cylindrical grinding, or more specifically, cylindrical-traverse grinding, or more specifically, cylindrical-traverse grinding when you have a long workpiece held between centers. Okay, long workpiece held between centers, probably without a steady rest, although this will still happen with a steady rest. Steady rest just reduces the problem, it doesn't eliminate it. And I divide barreling into two types. We got Donkey Kong-style and Beer Keg-style. So this video is going to be about Donkey Kong-style barreling. And I call it Donkey Kong-style because look at that barrel. That barrel is curved all the way through. Look at this beer keg barrel. Not really a barrel, but we'll call it a barrel. It's a straight cylinder. This guy's not a cylinder. This one, the Donkey Kong style, is a curve. So we call it Donkey Kong style. Barreled Donkey Kong style, beer keg style. Let's talk about Donkey Kong barreling and where it comes from. So here we've got a workpiece held between centers. And that guy's pretty stiff on the outside, not so stiff, and not at all stiff on the inside. And so now what happens is if we push on that guy, he's going to deflect like that. Now it's going to be very, very small, but if you want to know, put a dial gauge on your workpiece and push on it. It'll deflect. You can actually calculate a stiffness value in pounds per inch or newtons per micron or whatever you want to do. You can calculate a stiffness value and you will get different stiffness values along the entire length of the workpiece. So what you'll find is over here, it'll be pretty stiff, not so stiff, and pretty stiff. Okay, now, what does that mean in grinding? What happens is we go to grind and we get a lot of deflection in the middle and not so much deflection on the sides. We get a lot of deflection. So when we grind, the workpiece deflects a little bit on the edges and it deflects a lot in the center. Okay, now, so we say, hey man, I want to take a 25 micron of 1/1000 depth of cut. Well, you might get most of that 25 microns on the outside, but you're not going to get that 25 microns in the middle due to deflection. So you're actually grinding less than you think you are in the center. Now, you're grinding less than you think you are on the outside also, but you're grinding a lot less than you think you are on the center compared to the outside. And what happens? You get Donkey Kong barreling. You get a Donkey Kong shape on there. Now that's the cause. How do you deal with it? Now let's make things more complicated. You might say, hey man, I just spark out. I spark out and I eliminate that normal force. You eliminate the grinding normal force, but you've also got the coolant normal force. And that coolant normal force, depending on your wheel type, resin or vitrified, depending on how well you're cooling, depending on the impingement force and the hydrodynamic force, but whatever it is, that hydroplaning force is collectively what I call it. He's going to be there and he's not going away. So that hydroplaning force is still there, and it's still there on the edges, and it's still there in the center, it's still there during spark out, and so you're going to get deflection. Now, how do you cope with it? What do you do? First of all, as G.I. Joe said, knowing is half the battle. Just being aware of this. A lot of my customers say, okay, thank you, we figured it out now. We got a bunch of options. And some of the options are, number one, reducing your normal force. Now, reducing your grinding normal force is doable. How do you deal with the coolant normal force? Okay, do you turn your coolant down during spark out? Do you do something else? That's one option to deal with the coolant normal force. Option number two is stick a steady rest on there. It's not going to eliminate it, but it's going to give you more stiffness. But then you might get a 2-hump barrel instead of 1-hump barrel if you're not careful, if you have a super long workpiece, but that will still reduce the problem. That's another option. Another option is to tell the machine to grind an anti-taper to cope with the taper. So we actually tell the machine, we tell the machine to dress this shape, to grind that shape. And if it grinds that shape, but there's more deflection on the center than there is in the edge, we'll get something like that. Now, you kind of know what you're doing. You typically have to grind apart and then measure, but that's another option. Okay? My goal is to explain to you the cause of it, and most of the time my customers will say, okay, thank you. That's most of the battle. And now that we know the cause of it, we can find a solution for it. Jeff Badger, the grinding doc, talking about Donkey Kong style barreling. And this is the type of stuff I teach in my courses. This is the type of stuff that is outlined in the Book of Grinding.